Well, happy Mother's Day. And while there are undoubtedly those who are a part of our congregation who are thrilled to see me once again in a tie, I want to remind you of two things. The double-breasted suit, as the dressier suit, requires a tie. You have to wear a tie or a turtleneck. It's a little warm in May to be wearing a turtleneck, so the tie is what comes in. And secondly, this is in honor of my mother. For while she is not actually in attendance, as I am again preaching to empty pews, I imagine she might be watching on the congregation's Facebook page. And so if she is, Mom, this is for you. You know, for Mother's Day, I'm in a tie. And let's face it, most of us are willing to do things for our mothers that we might not be as eagerly to do if we're willing at all. And I'm not going to lie to you, I've been opposed to the stay-at-home mandates. I have been opposed for several reasons. First, as I said during Palm Sunday sermon, the percentages are just not right. You don't shut down an entire organism, culture, or society for such a low percentage of loss. As of this week, there were about 275,000 worldwide deaths from COVID-19. And while that number seems large, we need to remember it only amounts to 0.04% of our worldwide population. Second, the lockdowns were never intended to eliminate the virus. They were merely a means to prevent our healthcare facilities from being overrun. Again, you don't shut down a society to prevent doctors from being overworked. And third, as our continuing battle with the virus has already indicated, herd immunity is really the only option to truly put the virus in check. And herd immunity will never be developed with isolation protocols in effect. But this week gives us a fourth indication of the true value of fellowship, which we must forego as we accept isolation. Mother's Day is simply not the same without family ties. Here at Corinth, we use Mother's Day to honor not just the mothers of the congregation, but all the women of the church. And this year, there is no honor, and not one of our women will receive their annual to put in their garden. Friday, the ladies missed their annual mother-daughter banquet. The men missed their opportunity to serve. And since there was no mother-daughter banquet, the fellowship offered for Father's Day, the cookout, and the golf outing will also be forfeited next month. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's going too far. And of course, we all have submitted in the name of public safety. But we still find ourselves asking, is all the sacrifice really justified? Or are we giving up more than we should, or even really can afford to give up? Fellowship is one of the four pillars upon which the first century church was built. And they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of the bread and the prayers. And it's no different simply because we've entered the 21st century. The church still relies on the bonding and strengthening found only within the fellowship of the believers. However, fellowship is equally important as well, as every bit is essential to any society, nation, or culture. Isolation will never establish anything but fear, despair, and loneliness. Genesis 2:18. The Lord God said, "It's not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." And while our God was speaking specifically of the marriage bond, it's readily apparent that such a bond also eliminates the potential for loneliness throughout the years. Without the fellowship, which is an integral part of our design, we are all immediately thrust into the same position as those in assisted living or other similar institutions who find their society considerably smaller than it once may have been. And with that being said, let me quickly and emphatically add, I'm equally opposed to responding as though there is no need for concern or caution. We certainly need to consider our health and the health of those around us. We should avoid direct contact with the sick. We should regularly practice good hand washing techniques. We should protect our own lungs as well as those of others with masks. We should stay at home if we are ill. Those are common sense approaches to everyday life, let alone a particularly deadly virus. But to say we are all in this together is nothing short of a lie. When we are forced to remain distant and are expected to minimize our contact with those around us, we most certainly are not in it together. This week, as we continue our look at building a godly life, we're going to continue where we left off in Ruth last week. We're going to continue in the lives of two women who were willing to share in true fellowship. They were willing to share both the good and the bad. They were willing to share a common culture. They were willing to share a common religion. They were willing to share a common life. And as we saw last week, they had developed a marked dedication to each other. And that dedication was built through their common sufferings. Undoubtedly, they had memories of more pleasant times as well, but it was the harsh realities of life which brought them together and bound them as one, not the pleasantries. In today's charged climate, we are being told that the opposite is true. Sufferings should keep us apart, and only pleasantries will be able to bring us back together once again. So this week, in honor of Mother's Day, we turn again to Ruth, and we will discuss the choices we make for mothers. Last week, we considered the changes Ruth voiced she was willing to make because of the love she had for her mother-in-law, Naomi. This week, we'll see how those verbal commitments take shape in a life. And the first thing we have to see is that the choices for mom are choices of faithfulness. The first verse we will consider is the last verse of chapter 1, Ruth 1, verse 22. So Naomi returned with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Faithfulness means going where you aren't. With the limitations of translation, we can easily mistake this verse as saying, mistake what this verse is saying. We can find ourselves assuming that which we dismissed last week, that Ruth was really an Israelite translated to Moab, like Naomi, in answer to the famine. It seems that the two women were reversing their course. And of course, in this life, there are a lot of reasons for a course reversal. What we had hoped would work out has not. The people with whom we thought we would spend a lifetime don't wish to spend a lifetime with us. Economic pressures force us to move on. We're exhausted, burned out, overworked, or stressed beyond reason. Our goals and aims have simply changed over the course of time. But of course, none of those reasons illustrate faithfulness. Faithfulness is when we are called away from what we want to do for a friend who has something they feel they need to do. Years ago, when I was in Cincinnati, I got a call one night from my best friend from college who was currently living in Rochester, New York. He wanted me to leave the comfort of Cincinnati, a city that I dearly love, and at the same time, he was going to leave the comfort of his home in Rochester. He wanted me to meet him in Detroit the next weekend, and his purpose was very simple. He wanted to go to the cemetery where his parents were buried. He'd never been. And he simply wanted to say goodbye. Now, as most of you would probably agree, that is not a weekend outing which promises a lot of fun and hilarity. But at 2 o'clock on the next Saturday afternoon, I found myself nearly 300 miles from Cincinnati, standing in a cemetery in Michigan with my friend. The two of us were staring down at two grave markers. One of the gravestones represented an individual I had never met in my life. And the other marker, the resting place of a man I had met briefly one time. But so it is with Naomi and Ruth. In the Hebrew, the word returned only has to mean turned back, and that's what we need to see with their lives. Here are two companions who are both turning their backs on Moab and directing their courses in a totally different direction. Those are the choices we make in faithfulness, not to the dead, but to the living. Those are the choices we make that because we care. Those are the choices that take us away from where we might want to be to the places we need to be. Last week we considered Ruth's promise to Naomi, and the promise is first kept in her willingness to do just this. She's called from her home, her family, her friends, her culture, all memories of childhood, all of the comforts to which she's accustomed, to journey at least half as far as I traveled to Michigan. But her dedication was even greater than mine. I made the trip in less than 4 hours straight up I-75. Ruth and Naomi's journey was before cars and certainly before expressways. It was a journey which at the minimum lasted a week, and depending on their starting point in Moab, may have taken considerably longer. And while faithfulness means going where you aren't, faithfulness means being faithful where you are. Ruth 2, verse 2. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor." You know, Ruth isn't asking anything unusual. The Lord had commanded through Moses that the stranger, the alien, the needy, the orphan, and the widow be provided for in at least a rudimentary living. Leviticus 23. When you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleanings of your harvest. You are to leave them for the needy and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Now, of course, any student of Scripture will immediately argue, but that is from Leviticus. It's a directive only to the Levites and the priests. But shortly, we will also look at a similar passage in Deuteronomy, which no one can argue excludes the congregation. But we need to note the command for the welfare of those who would otherwise be without. It's not communistic, it's not socialistic, it's not even social security after due retirement age. It was the offering of daily sustenance for daily effort. Anyone who's ever had to glean even a garden by hand understands the backbreaking work involved. But we need to consider farther than that. Because this is not regular gleaning. This is not taking in the fullness of the crops. This is only after the crops have been picked. And the needy are allowed to go in and take what is left. You know, it's one thing to sit in one spot and simply fill your bushel or your apron. It's quite another to follow those who are filling their measures and simply scrape up the remnants they've left behind. You know, for several years, Linda planted a garden, and the garden usually had what you might consider easy to grow bumper crops. You know, we usually had those were tomatoes and cucumbers and green beans, things that grow pretty well, things that grow in abundance, things that are pretty simple. And when the vines were full, it was, if not a pleasure, at least not a trial to go out and pick. You might easily find enough green beans in 5 minutes for 2 or 3 meals. But as the season progressed, the only beans left were those previously undetected under leaves. It became more and more difficult, more and more time-consuming to locate enough even for one meal. Now consider that truth in a barley or wheat field. It could easily take a day's labor to find a day's sustenance. And the process would be repeated the next day. Ruth is not volunteering for such success. She's not going out with the expectation of quickly returning. She's going out to toil, and her toil is to keep Naomi alive. Daily toil requires the greatest faithfulness of all. It's in the daily grind in which we realize a person's real character. And that's why it's never enough to come to church on Sunday and forget the kingdom in the other 6 days. That is not faithfulness. Nor is it faithfulness to simply remember your mother, her sacrifice, her dedication, her love. Only one day a year. Which brings us to our second lesson. The choices for mom are choices for good. Now that's no more apparent than in the lives of small children. Small children may not have much to give, but everything they give with a whole heart. They want to share. They want to express their concern, their affection, their love. They want to be a part of bringing a smile to someone's face. When I was in elementary school, there was a family-run bakery just a block and a half from our house. And on several occasions, George and I would chip in together and buy a little cake for Mom. Now, I can't tell you much about the cakes. I don't remember what size they were. I don't remember if the filling was always the same or if it varied. I can't even tell you for what events they were purchased. But the thing I do remember about the cakes is the first cake or two that we bought was $3. And then they jumped to 350. When I was talking to George this week about it, he said, well, yeah, that's because we created demand and the supply was limited. But I'm going to tell you, for two preteen kids who are not working, that additional 50 cents really hurt. But we continued to make the sacrifice on occasion. And that's what kids do. Kids make choices based on the good they see. They make good choices as they strive to be good kids. And to that end, good choices must be godly choices. Ruth 2, verse 4. Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." You know, we're already getting a feel for the kind of man Boaz is. The greeting is not just a matter of courtesy. It represents a life filled with godliness. He truly wants the reapers to revel in their lives under the Lord's provision. And the reapers want him to know the blessing of the Lord, because it's a symbiotic relationship. Both the reapers and Boaz rely upon each other, and both benefit from their relationship with each other and with God. And because of that, we have to realize that God does not always work in the miraculous, but he always works miraculously. You know, there are more times in our lives when it seems that God works in the mundane. We get a paycheck, which includes a raise we really needed but never expected. A good friend suggests a better job, which we did not even know was available. We receive a call from a friend just when we feel at our lowest. We hear something on the radio or the news which sparks a creative idea when we've really been in kind of a brain fog for a while. And none of those things seem to indicate God's miraculous providence. After all, they're common everyday occurrences. They're things that happen to everyone all the time. They're not like Elijah feeding the widow for 3 years from one small jar of flour and one small bottle of oil. They're not like coming out of a fiery furnace, not even smelling like smoke. They're not like crossing the sea on dry land. They're not like changing water into wine. It's not as spectacular as seeing the walls of Jericho fall. We often dismiss such things as coincidence, as our own personal strength, or even as our due. But God's miracles are often more about our receptiveness than about his demonstration. Boaz puts God first in his dealings with his reaper, and accordingly, his reapers put God first in their labors. And as a result, all are blessed. In the lives of Naomi and Ruth, we've already seen the two women put each other ahead of themselves. Naomi told both of her daughters-in-law, "Go back to Moab, go back to your family, go back to where you love and live." And Ruth has said, "No. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, two selfless, sacrificing people sharing a common bond." And so good choices will be noticed choices. In the next few verses, Boaz notices Ruth. Now, we're not told why. It may be her work ethic. She continued to work while others stopped. Or maybe she was trying to gather more than others were trying to gather. Maybe it was just simply because she was a lovely young woman. He thought, man, she's got nice eyes. She beautiful, sparkling eyes, beautiful lashes. And look at those ruby lips. Maybe it was nothing more than mere curiosity on seeing someone he simply does not recognize. When he's told who she is, he approaches her. And it's not just a typical approach. It's an approach with a real offer of promise. He tells her, don't go to another field. He says, stay with my maidens. Stay with them in the field they're in. Work with them in the field they're in. Stay here. He says, keep your eyes on the reapers and follow closely. And we don't realize just how critical this command is. Because the closer she follows, the more she'll be able to take for herself. The closer she follows, the less it will be, the less of the remnants will be already gathered by someone else. She'll be there to get whatever drops, to get whatever's mishandled, to get whatever is available. And then he tells her, when you're thirsty, you stop. You get water from my supply. In fact, you take the water that my servants have drawn. Verse 10. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And Boaz answered and said to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. And then continuing in verse 14, and at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. All of his attention, all of his concern, all of his direction is the result of the good and godly choices Ruth has made concerning her mother-in-law. Now, it's true that all men may not appreciate godly choices or even believe them to be in the best interest of the individual. But all men notice those kinds of choices. All men are aware of those kinds of choices. All men are made to at least question their own conscience because of those kinds of choices. And I love the fact that Boaz is so aware of Ruth's life, even before he gets to know her, even before he meets her, even before he has apparently seen her to recognize her. It says a lot about Ruth. She does not blow her own horn. Her motives are unselfish and pure. She is sacrificing for Naomi out of love. And since Mahlon is gone, Ruth is paying a debt she simply does not owe. You know, Our Ladies missed their annual dinner and program this past Friday, but I hope they never miss out on the reward offered to those who truly honor those who have been like mothers to them. Because it's those who care, it's those who give who deserve the most. And because good choice will be noticed, good choices may be rewarded choices. Now notice I said they may be rewarded choices, not that they will be rewarded choices. A promise of reward may do dishonor to an otherwise honorable act. They may be rewarded if the right people notice, if the right people see it, if the right people comment. Verse 15. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. And also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. Now, as promised a while ago, we now come to the passage in Deuteronomy. When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. You know, it's unlikely that the reapers would ever forget a sheaf. You know, it's hard to believe that you're bundling up sheaves of barley or sheaves of wheat or sheaves of any grain. It's hard to believe that you would bundle it up, set it down, and walk away, leaving it there. You know, it's kind of a, what am I thinking type thing. But on the other hand, You get interrupted, you miscount, you forget that you put one beside the tree or behind the rock or wherever you may have been. And so it could happen. But anything left at the end of the day in the field, even that which was already bound and baled and gleaned, was free game for the needy and for those who needed it most. Boaz certainly is aware of that. But Boaz, in his answer, goes beyond the letter of the law, and he expands even the spirit of the law. Boaz has granted Ruth the privilege of taking from that which is bundled. Now, it's not left in the field. It's not forgotten. It's not the end of the day and they've walked away from it. It's prepared for threshing, and yet Ruth is allowed to go and help herself for that which is already there. Now, undoubtedly, Ruth was relatively circumspect in her gleaning among the sheaves. She probably only took a handful here and a handful there. But we need to note Boaz's other condition. Do not insult her. And the meaning of the Hebrew is, do not humiliate or shame her. The reapers were to allow Ruth her scant portion, even from what they collected, and they were not to criticize her brazenness. Neither were they to make her feel her desolation of destitution. Neither were they to call her names. They were sent to allow it to happen. And while it's not said, we can almost certainly infer that as they pulled out grain to leave for her, they also did that discreetly and in the good spirit in which was intended. You know, can you see somebody, they're gleaning, and Ruth's right behind them, and I need to pull out some and leave it for them. Hey, you, poor woman, here, have a handful. It would kind of destroy the meaning of the gift, the value in which she found. Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi is rewarded by Boaz's faithfulness to the spirit of God's law. Boaz's faithfulness is no miracle, but it provides in a miraculous way. In our lives, we may do right and 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 do right until we're sick of doing right and never receive a single ounce of support or aid upon this earth. But we can learn from this love story that God's reward will provide in many ways we may never expect if we are simply willing to recognize what has been done. Which brings us to our third lesson on the choices for our mothers. The choices for mom are choices which surprise. You know, as I mentioned a moment ago, I can't remember the kind of cakes we bought. I can't be certain of the events for which they were purchased, but I do remember the real joy of bringing home that little white square box. You all know what a cake box looks like. Bringing home that little box with the cake in it and just being thrilled to offer it as a gift. I can relate to the joy Ruth must have felt as she returned home to Naomi that evening. Verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. That's about a bushel. I mean, you're not talking a light amount of grain. You know, she didn't get a little handful. You know, we'll make a loaf of bread tonight. She's got a bunch of barley. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she took out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. That's the leftovers from the lunch that Boaz provided for her. She carried it up to bring those tasty morsels home as well. Ruth brought home a bushel of grain. But more surprising than that, she also gives Naomi that which was left over from mealtime. No need for Naomi to fix dinner or worry about what she was to eat. No need to start on the barley that evening. It would have been as wondrous a night for Naomi as it had been a wondrous day for Ruth. Sometimes surprising choices are the most readily forgotten. This week I called Mom just to ask her about those little cakes because I couldn't remember any of the details. I couldn't tell you what kind of cake they were. I couldn't tell you how often we got them, what events they represented. I couldn't tell you any of that. And so I thought that certainly she would remember more of the details than I did. And I was amazed because she didn't even remember the cakes at all. I mean, I was her son. I was giving my whole heart. And I'm going to tell you, $3 and then especially $3.50, that was a big hunk of change for an unemployed preteen. And my mom doesn't even remember those cakes. She didn't remember that there was a bakery in the little plaza just a block and a half from our house. She didn't remember anything about it. But her forgetfulness is not that big a surprise. Think about it, those cakes were presented 45 to 50 years ago. So much life has passed since then. We moved away from Kettering to Canton. George and I both graduated from high school. I graduated with my bachelor's degree and later earned my master's degree. George married Janet. They had 4 children. I married Linda. Mom received her degree from Kent State. I've been in Texas, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and now North Carolina. 3 of my 4 grandparents have passed in that particular era. My mother lost her brother to MS. And Dad has passed. In light of those 45 to 50 years, it'd be very easy to see why 3 or 4 little cakes spread over a couple of years would not stand out in your mind. But here's the thing. If it wasn't for the written record with all that follows, a bushel of barley and a quick dinner would quickly be lost to the greater events yet to unfold. We only know of the wondrous surprise because it's written down. It's written down. It's in the record for us to remember how God works in the mundane. Ruth is a testimony to making note of all God does. Literally, making note of what God does in your life. Maybe you want to do little 3x5 cards. Maybe you want to do a journal. Maybe you just want to have a chalkboard in your kitchen and write down blessings when they occur. But Ruth's testimony to making note of all God does when God does it. And only then will we see the building blocks as they go up to build our eternal natures. And so finally, surprising choices are repeatable. So much of life goes by and you think, I will never get back to that moment. So much of life goes by and you think that will never happen again. So much of life comes by and you say, this is a once in a lifetime. But so many of our choices are repeatable. Like I said, I don't even know how many of those little 3 or 350 cakes we bought, but I know that I was delighted every time we brought one to the house. Repeated surprise, repeated joy, wondrous blessing. Verse 22. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, lest others fall upon you in another field." So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Now the barley harvest began in late March or early April. The wheat harvest followed on its heels in late April through May. And Ruth continued to work Boaz's fields for 2 months. Unlike many of the needy, she would have become a fixture in that harvest. She would have become a part of that squad, that group, that entourage. And while it has nothing to do with work, I couldn't help but think of college PE class. On Monday and Wednesday nights, Coach Henderson had a co-ed PE class. And in the spring, the game, of course, for the PE class was softball. And for all my years of school, I went every single Monday and Wednesday night to play softball. That was what I did. My senior year, Coach Henderson had a note in the school paper that he did not need extras for the Monday and Wednesday night classes. The classes were large enough, and he did not need extras. We were still allowed to come and encouraged to come to the classes during the week, during the day, but for those night classes, would not need extras. Monday night came and I did not go to softball. First time probably in my school years that I had missed a Monday night PE softball game. And on Tuesday, as we were closing up our literature class, Mr. Henderson caught me after class and asked me where I had been. Why weren't you there? And I told him I'd seen his announcement in the school paper, and I just knew that as an extra, I would have to go to the other 4 classes during the week. And he smiled at me and said, "Jim, you are not an extra. You're a regular. You don't even need to guess where I was Wednesday night." I don't even have to imagine Ruth's place among the maids, the reapers, and Boaz's hired men. She belonged. Boaz had made her a part of his community, a part of his society, a part of his family, if you will. All because of the way she treated her mother-in-law. The only thing more remarkable than her presence would have been her absence. As we celebrate Mother's Day, we all realize the great value of our mothers. For while every woman may not be a mother, every child has had a mother. Hopefully, we can all look back upon our biological mothers and see the faithfulness of their lives. If not, there may be another woman who has proven to be a faithful surrogate mother to each of us. We should offer that same kind of faithfulness, whether it's surrogate or biological, because they've done their best to bring us to our best. We should be able to look back and see the good each of those women has done in our lives. All we need to do is try to choose to offer the same in return. And undoubtedly, there have been times when we have been surprised by our mothers. Maybe those surprises were quickly forgotten, but that does not mean we can't offer the same grace to those who meant so much. But of all the choices we make for mother, the most important is simply that choice of fellowship. It's simply in the sharing of lives in which we express our affection. And as we are continuing to learn through the story of deep affection, such care honors not only our mothers, but our God. And such choices will help us in the building